and I'm on the team over here at Lilt. We are so excited to be a sponsor at this year's GALA Connected Bounce Forward Conference. Whether you're looking to launch your digital content into new markets, localize your platform, or offer a personalized experience to international customers, we'd love to learn more about your goals for global experience this year. We work with brands including Canva, Intel, and ASICS. So come stop by our booth to enter our AirPods raffle. There will be multiple winners. And we'd love you to learn more about Lilt's AI-powered translation solutions. We'll see you there.
Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the GALA conference. I'm Sharon Tabraham, and I'm the moderator for the session this morning, or this afternoon. I'm based in Cape Town. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon for us. So before we start, just a few little housekeeping notes, which I'm sure you are getting familiar with now, is if you could just keep yourselves muted. The presentation is going to be recorded today and can be accessed through the schedule following the session, if you're interested. Please get some questions ready for our panel. They'd love to answer them at the end of the session, and you can type those into the Q&A tab on your conversation menu. Any technical difficulties, please just put up your hand and one of the GALA girls will help you if they can. So we're here to welcome Dita Ronge from Boost Lingo today. Our panel discussion is on cybersecurity. Dita is the co-founder of Boost Lingo and the VP of Global Strategy and Business Development. Boost Lingo is based in Austin, Texas. It is an industry leader for interpreting management systems, development, and multilingual communications delivery software. The Boost Lingo platform provides language access technology to language service organizations everywhere across the globe. Thank you and welcome, Dita. He is joined by panelists Jose Costa, who is the Chief Information Security Officer and Head of Labs at Tugboat Logic, a data security and compliance assurance technology and software company. Jose is joining us from Alberta, and we are also joined by Mark Arnold, who is VP of Advisory Services at Lares, who is an international cyber security consulting company. Both Jose and Mark are deeply experienced cybersecurity and regulatory compliance industry experts. There was a lot of tongue twisting in that little introduction. So welcome and thank you, gentlemen. The floor is now yours.
Sharon, thanks so much. That was seamless. That was great. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thank you, GALA. Really excited to be here, GALA Connected, Bounce Forward, to talk about this subject on cybersecurity, particularly as it relates to the language industry. And I am joined by my esteemed colleagues here, Jose and Mark, and really excited to get these guys on board for this panel. They both bring a ton of experience in this space, and it's something that governance, risk, and compliance is something that is a ongoing and growing concern for language agencies across the globe, and certainly in this time as we move more and more into this digital Zoom economy, virtual conference air meet economy, as it were. We really need to be cognizant of what our posture is as it relates to cybersecurity. And every day we hear stories, and really think that this is something that those of us in the language space are paying a much closer attention to. And so excited to have this conversation today. Hopefully we'll hit on a lot of the topics that are on the top of everyone's minds today. We'll put some poll questions together. Maybe GALA, if you could pop up the poll questions. And while we're doing that, we've got 2 or 3 poll questions there. I might just have Jose and Mark, maybe you could just give us a really quick overview each of your organizations, and they're similar and they're very different in a lot of different ways. So it'd be great if we could get some context and talk about that while we're doing the poll.
Sure, thank you. You want me to go first, Mark?
It's all yours.
I'll throw it at.
Sounds good.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you for having me here. Hopefully, I can answer all the questions you have and be useful, in this interesting topic. Just as Sharon mentioned, like TacoLogic is a SaaS platform that it really facilitates the automation of your compliance program and just obtaining and automating certifications. For those of you who have been through a security audit before, it requires you to be, on top of things like collect evidence. We are trying to automate, all the evidence collection and all the, back and forth that goes on with the auditors. The platform provides templates, content, and guidance just to, make it very easy to go through one of those security certifications that can be a real struggle for a lot of companies. That's it in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark,
So
a little bit about Laris.
So Laris is your company that prepares you for those nightmares. We prepare you before the nightmare happens. So we are an adversarial engineering and simulation company that helps folks with their continuous security. And so we perform offensive security against your social, physical, and electronic components of your company. So think about social engineering, phishing campaigns. We will cut through fences, use fake badging to get into your environment. We'll plug into your corporate networks or your cloud networks and try to find out how far we can get into networks. The reason we do that is we are there to help validate the controls that you have in place, validate that operators can, in fact, perform their duties in the event that there is an attack. So beyond just assurance that we do, I am the VP of Advisory Services, as you've heard, for our vCISO practice. So we help with the maturity of programs. We do that, but then we also add the additional adversarial component to validate that those controls and that those operators are actually performing efficiently in their roles.
Fantastic. And obviously all of these things we'll dive into a little bit deeper as we go along. I guess for me, the first question that when I got into the compliance questions that we had when we first formed BoostLingo, it was one of those things where you ask the question, you pose the question, okay, so who's going to handle compliance? And everybody take a step backwards, and then you're standing there like, oh, I guess it's me, which is great. And I have had a baptism in compliance over the last 5 years with BoostLingo, and it's been it's something that I would participate in other organizations, but to actually be involved in it on a regular basis, the learning curve was definitely there, and learned a lot, and can really appreciate now the process and the path towards compliance. And so I guess my first question to both of you, and I'll throw it to Jose first. Your governance and risk and compliance framework usually starts with one specific program or another. Just something that you want to set up. You got to start somewhere, and I think that a question for a lot of organizations would be, okay, great. What do I do first? What's the right one to do first, or is there one that if I do this one first, will it overlap on some others? Can I kill two birds with one stone here? What's the most important sort of first step for organizations that want to get things underway?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So the pragmatic answer to this is that normally organizations, the one they do first is the one that they are asked to do first. by their customers or by their stakeholders, right? The one they have to. Like, the truth is that nobody does this for fun, right? Like, especially you're starting a company, right? Like, you're busy, like you have a lot of things going on, like operational issues. You're trying to, develop things, right? It's not that security is back of mind. Like, it is important you take it seriously, but the whole thing around compliance, documenting things, right? Like demonstrating that and being transparent, it just, you're not spending a lot of energy. So it depends a little bit on where you are. Like North America, where we are, normally you get asked a lot for SOC 2. If you're in Europe, I know in Australia as well, an ISO 27001 is going to be the beginning. Even before you think about certifications, I would focus on legislation. If you have to comply with anything, right? In Europe, you're going to have to comply with GDPR before you even consider. I mean, it's not an option, right? You have to do it. So the answer is it depends. But I would say if any of those two, ISO or SOC 2, seem to be the ones that cover most areas and overlap quite a lot, I would recommend starting with one of those two. Those are the ones. But again, like, people will do whatever they are asked, right? Like, they don't wake up one day and say, hey, just gonna read this massive, security framework and start implementing it, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Mark, do you want to add any color to that in terms of, where to start?
Yeah, typically when we're talking to customers, we're hoping that they have a good partnership with business leaders, because it's typically business drivers that are going to define your compliance roadmap. Those business drivers might have economic components to it. So we've worked with businesses who, in the States, who want to work with the federal government, Department of Defense. They're going to be driven to compliance frameworks like FedRAMP and others. Folks who want to do business within the U.S., if you're doing commerce, you're pretty much going to be driven to implement NIST standards. But if you want to do business worldwide, as Jose pointed out, ISO frameworks become a part of that equation. I think it's very important that partnership between GRC owners and business owners are important for the definition of one's compliance strategy, and that alignment with the business helps define what those compliance efforts would be.
Okay, I'll throw this out, and either of you can take this initially. Once you've established, okay, we're gonna go for it. What are some of the sort of initial things that you need to just get ready for it, and what does that path look like? We'll start with Mark this time. Like, what is the path forward? What's the pre-flight checklist look like for organizations that determine, okay, that's it, we're going to pursue a SOC 2, or we're going to pursue HIPAA. Of course, each has different levels of intensity and work involved. We probably should go down the list of a few of them and talk about that as well. But let me throw out there, what would be sort of, I've decided I'm going to do this. We're going to jump in. We're going to jump in with both feet. What's step one?
Sure. I should have also added one other driver to besides business driver. I was at a very large retailer in the States, and we were one of the early breach trials. And so sometimes events will impact and will also determine what type of programs you have to go down and pass to implement. I think the initial conversations and getting ready for those framework and certification paths is find a reputable partner, preferably an external partner. You can have your internal auditors be a part of that conversation, working with internal stakeholders and constituents, align with your business stakeholders to first do a gap analysis. Gap analysis will help you understand what your current state and what control gaps you have in particular domain areas. We definitely advise that for any particular certification framework or standard that you're going after, whether it be SOC 1, ISO 27000 series, or any of the NIST standards, or even looking at some of the privacy standards out there, GDPR, CCPA, and then looking at on the health side with HIPAA, that you begin those conversations with these gap analyses that will kind of indicate those areas of focus. You also want to define areas of scope. In the past, working with companies, going down the path of ISO, you can't certify your entire company for the most part, especially for large companies, Fortune 50s, Fortune 1000s. You want to be careful to define how much you want to be in scope for those particular certification paths as well. And so that requires a lot of pre-conversation, a lot of alignment across business units and with all those who would have a hand in those certification efforts.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can certainly attest to the audit or the initial review of documentation and controls and all of that. It can be quite disheartening when you first start looking at the gap analysis, as it were. And then, of course, the remediation process. And just talking about Tugboat for a second. I know you have a utility in the platform where you've templatized some of the controls, and there's assistance with building out this documentation. It can be very daunting to look at the compendium of documents that need to comprise a HIPAA book or a SOC 2 book. And maybe Jose, talk a little bit about what that process looks like with,
Yeah, like very similar to like what Mark was saying, right? I mean, one of the most overlooked things that companies do, especially at the beginning, is what you're explaining, Dieter, right? Like somebody's got to be responsible for this program, right? Somebody has to wear this hat. And in many cases, like it's a sign, but not really, right? Like there's, okay, you're going to do it, but you don't really carve time out of your week to really take care of it. There's documentation, there is things to create, there is people that you have to follow, right? To do certain tasks. Like if nobody's wearing that hat, right? Like it's going to fail, right? Like it's that business support and that, like, so that's, one of the first things, and it's completely overlooked. And the other thing, adding to what Mark was saying, super important to understand why you're doing it and what you're protecting, right? It's very different, right? If you're going for HIPAA, you're protecting, like patient information, right? So where is it, right? Like what systems are in scope? If you have PCI, you're going to be protecting credit card data, right? You have SOC 1, it's, financial information that your customers may use. So it's very important to center, like if you get the scope right and you assign responsibilities, that's, already you're set up for success, right? And then you can get into what do you need to document, what do you need, like, Tugboat really helps with this, like, because we have all the templates, they are ready for there, you don't have to create them from scratch. But if you set up those basics, you're already,
and of course the road to hell is paved with good intentions. When you start these things, one of the things we did right out of the gate at BoostLingo, I took on the data privacy component, that documentation, and our CTO took on the data security pieces, which made the most sense because I started to get into the weeds a little bit, and thankfully we were able to tackle it. I think a lot of folks don't realize that when so HIPAA is a you're self you're doing a self audit, right? It's nobody's certified. There's no certification. It's self-certifying, and I think that if we're being real about it, people take a lot of leeway with self-certifying, right? I've got 20 documents that speak to the the regulation, but am I really compliant? That's the question. And then there are other programs which we'll get into a little bit in this as well, like SOC, where you're ready, but someone's going to tell you later if you're compliant or not. There's an auditor that you're going to pay to come in and look at how well you're set up. So I guess my question is, what does that workload look like, and what are some things that organizations can do just in advance of that to prepare for it? I think that's another thing, is that when you start to do inventory of the things that you need to have in place, you often don't know where to look first. And if there's some structure, which an organization like Tugboat has with the platform, or Laris will come in with that as well. What does that workload look like, and are there any strategies for completing it in an efficient manner? I'll throw it out to Jose. You want to take it first, and we'll go to Mark.
Sure. I'll take it. So the structure. So this is one of it depends, right? Like, it's one of those answers that I hate, right? It depends on your complexity. It depends what you have. It depends on, right, like your experience, the size, what are you dealing with, right? What the complexity of like the data that you're managing and the services that you're providing, right? Like, it's gonna depend quite a lot. But in terms of like focusing, what I would recommend, starting small, right? Like, starting with little pieces, like what I'm going to do. And again, it's a bit of a risk assessment, right? Like, you're thinking to yourself, a risk assessment and a business need that Mark was talking, right? Like, if you have patient data, you have to comply with HIPAA. As you said, nobody's going to come in and certify you, right? Like, this is not about, but if you do something wrong, you're going to, like, then that's when the, consequences happen, right? Because then after you, there's fines, there is consequences for non-compliance, same as privacy legislations, right? There is not really but I would put those at the beginning, and I would start piecemealing them and making sure that you're doing the, asking this question to yourself, this risk assessment, right? What can I, what do I have to lose? What do I have to do to make sure that my customers are comfortable? You need to start building that trust with your customers and stakeholders, right? What would you like to see? Put yourself in their shoes, right? What would they like to see? Transparency, having this person responsible for it, having a landing page on your website that talks about it and how you're responsible, and really following what you're saying, right? That's very important, even at the beginning, even if you don't have a certification. Just saying, hey, we care about this data that you're trusting me with this data, and we care about it, and this is what we have in place, right? That goes a long way, especially at the beginning.
I was gonna say, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, and I think Jose is very correct in all of those points. And I would even think about, making sure that your stakeholders, whether your legal partners, your business leaders, and your GRC owner are very versed in the regulation itself, right? We say HIPAA. HIPAA has five rules. So when we say HIPAA, which rule are we talking about? The privacy rule, or the security rule, and then there are three others. And then understanding, HIPAA in the larger context of privacy. We can go back to the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, has their privacy cheat sheet, that kind of underlies a lot of the privacy initiatives across various frameworks. And so, when we talk about HIPAA, making sure that the teams that are involved in defining the scope actually are very versed in the regulation itself. And then, one of the things we do at Laris is to make those fine distinctions. If we're testing those controls for privacy, we're looking at health, health data. If we're looking at the security rule, we're testing, electronically for, the movement of EHR, health records, where they're going, what are the controls around that? Is it encrypted in transit? Is it encrypted at rest? And so there's a fine distinction, as I said, what actually are you scoping for? What work are you preparing for? And being versed in those regulations is very important.
One of the things that, the GALA conference is, one of the great things about the GALA conference is it's a very international conference, and there's a lot of folks here that are across the globe, and for language organizations that are in Europe or are doing business across the oceans with Europe, GDPR is obviously a very big concern, and some of us we're waiting for the other shoe to drop in terms of we've been watching it very, very carefully. We do what we think is the necessary amount of attention to being GDPR compliant. The costs to get caught out are staggering, right? I mean, you definitely don't want to get caught out and have a data breach and then be or some sort of privacy leak of some sort, and you don't want to be that guy. And I think a lot of U.S. based organizations are mystified by GDPR, and a lot of organizations in Europe adhere to it and are doing the best that they can. But also, it is a bit of a mystery as well. Is there some overlap in some of the programs that we do in the U.S. that can help with GDPR? Can we maybe talk about GDPR a little bit in terms of your experiences with it so far, and language being what it is, a lot of agencies that and organizations that do translation work and interpreting and software localization are working with vendors and resources and folks across country borders and things like that. You do the work and you hope that you're compliant sometimes. And what are some of the real risks and real challenges? I think be interested to hear what both of you have to say about that. I'll throw it to Mark first.
Sure. Previously, I've worked at a large corporation here in the States, Charter Communications. So very large corporation globally. And GDPR was a nightmare, quagmire, conundrum, all the big words in terms of preparing our customers, working with our marketing team, making sure the right messaging was out. Again, partnership with legal counsel to make sure all the contractual language was correct. I think one of the ways that eased our way into some kind of compliance of not just the company but of our platforms. We were a SaaS company. I know I'm speaking to a lot of folks who are SaaS providers or SaaS consumers on this in this session. Is doing a lot of the crosswalk work. You'll see that a lot of the NIST documentation. I know Tugboat probably has that, where they're mapping across various similar standards and guidances. And I think that helps kind of cut down the work, kind of helps with the level of effort that's needed to meet the demands of things like GDPR and CCPA. We did a lot of comparison work. Having built the foundation with GDPR, when we had to make the pivot and the leap to CCPA, we were able to show, based on the comparative languages of the two guidances, that having done the initial footwork helps you prepare for any additional legislation coming down the line. Earlier, I mentioned OECD. That in itself is a contextual background, provides some contextual and pretext context for how one deals with privacy. And, who has access to that data, what, least privileged accessibility to that said data. I think being versed in that and combining that with, the work in one of the major regulations, and then doing the crosswalk effort work against similar guidances is one way that folks can get ahead of any legislations coming down the line.
I would agree. There's quite a lot of overlap between the legislations, and the GDPR specifically, I would say most challenging things that I've seen. It's going to depend a little bit, right? If you're doing B2C, B2B, right? If you are the controller of data, if you're processing the data on behalf of somebody, right? Whatever, obviously you're going to focus on different things, right? And what you're doing with that data. B2B, what I would say, which is probably the most common one, in this setting. If you're processing data, like the most important thing is going to be how you manage your vendors. Like that's something that people normally they may not pay as much attention, right? And it's super important, right, for GDPR. If you are a controller of data, understanding what your data is, I would say the Article 30, like just listing what you have, where it is, and again, what vendors are managing it, because in many cases, like these days, right, like SaaS companies, right, your data is scattered all over the place, right? And those vendors have other vendors, and those vendors have other vendors, right? So it just starts spreading like a spider web, right? So knowing where things are is important, because even if one of those vendors loses data, you're going to be in the news, right?
Sure.
Right.
And and that's something you can outsource the service, but you cannot outsource the risk, right? You will be dealing with that, right? So
that brings up a really, really good point, and that is that organizations that leverage other services and other technologies out there, it's a leap of faith sometimes when you're using a vendor to support a particular line of business, and they say, "Yep, we're compliant." We see a lot of security questionnaires thrown over the wall for folks that are going after a particular RFP, and I think a lot of agencies are starting to see these with greater frequency and eyes wide open, because these are not small inconsequential questionnaires. They're 100 questions, and they get nitty gritty. What advice or what guidance would you give to agencies that are working with technology vendors out there that what would you say?
I mean, the easiest way to, like, it depends if you're in the receiving end of answering those questionnaires or not. If you're in the receiving end and you feel like you're answering a lot, like you're getting a lot of these questionnaires, probably one of the easiest thing you could do is actually look for a certification that could, because in many cases, if you have it, like customers already trust you by default and they don't send you the questionnaire. Not always,
right.
But that's probably one of the most efficient ways of, right? Like you have a third party coming and auditing you, so you can show it to a customer.
That's right.
That's not possible. That, I would say, if you're answering a lot of questionnaires, really consider getting a third party certification.
Yep.
I was at a company, global company, ComputerShare, where we had tens of billions of Social Security numbers because we were providing stock programs, internal employee stock programs for companies. And so we were being audited 30 or 40 times a month, not just quarterly or biannually. I mean, we're talking about 30 audits a month. And one of the ways around it, was because, as Jose pointed out earlier, there's a lot of overlap. And so we kind of built a book of questions to try to stay ahead of that. And instead of, having those auditors on site spending 3 days with us, we're like, here's the book. If there's something in there that doesn't cover what you're looking for, come back to us. And that was one way we tried to get ahead of it. I think things like unified compliance framework frameworks help as well. Like, again, you're answering questions that can be crosswalk across all the controls. If you're consuming cloud, there's the notion of pass-through audits. And so if that cloud provider has those certifications, you can kind of bank, as it were, on their compliance hygiene. Again, as a consumer, you're still responsible if you're building applications and other services on that provider's cloud infrastructure. You still have to, build compliant services and software, but you do kind of get out of the extra work of having to think about compliance in that cloud infrastructure. And so,
Right.
from a cloud perspective, there is some positive news for those who are concerned about those types of certifications, because those are passed down to the consumer.
Right. Right, and that builds, having that confidence is definitely super helpful as you contemplate your path. In this pandemic COVID times, right? We've seen workers move out of offices into home offices all over the place, and fingers crossed we will return to some level of happiness and joy in the next 12 months, right? Hopefully headed in the right direction, and people will return back to work. But I think this is going to also be a little bit of the new normal, right? And we're going to have we certainly have seen it in the tech sector where some offices are staying virtual and they're going to stay virtual. Opens up a whole other can of worms, right? Now, where IT departments had that at least a modicum of control over what was locked down in the office. You've got your folks that are set up at home, and maybe they're set up with a VPN into your systems, maybe not. What advice, what guidance can you give to organizations that have now set up very much of a very virtual working telecommute situation?
So we've kind of dealt with this a lot with our clients. We've actually blogged on this. We call them converged networks or near networks. One of my sons is home right now, and if there were persistent attackers looking to come after me, maybe come through Laris, they might come through the school, through his devices, and through that vector, maybe into my home network, and then maybe back to Laris. This whole notion of we see this whole notion of converged networks. We see it not just as a negative, but also as a positive. It's a positive for us to go back to companies and have them review their compliance frameworks and strategies. Some of the compliance strategies and risk governance that have been deployed at in the quote unquote normal networks should be transferable down to these converged networks, and where necessary, you add additional controls because you want to follow the data. The data is and information is what we're trying to protect from attackers, and so we should. We're asking folks to be kind of nimble, kind of agile as they're thinking about their compliance. There should be some pandemic clauses, maybe additional contractual clauses from service providers. At the same time, we also see, since it has become a growing and enhanced telework time and period that we're living in now, that we can go back to our corporate data centers, and there's less traffic flowing through those data centers. Now we can go back, and as our company goes back and kind of vets the controls that are in place, it's an opportunity for us to make sure that those data repositories and those places of important and sensitive data actually have those controls in place, while those folks who would normally be on site or be in those corporate environments are kind of now spread out. It gives us a little bit more opportunity to do some more granular work around control and assessment of those controls.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on because I know that you guys do attack threat detection and all of that stuff, and the importance of doing penetration testing in your own networks, and I mean, the threat is very real. If someone can shut down an entire pipeline, it just, the mind boggles, and that's on a grand scale, of course, but even the smaller ransomware attacks and malware attacks, and just the every day you read about something else, something new, and if you're a small to medium enterprise business, it's maybe not at the front of your mind, but then you read an article or you hear a news story and you're like, man, could that happen to me? Yeah, absolutely it could, and it might. What guidance would you give to organizations that it seems to me that these attacks are becoming more sophisticated, more frequent, and I think that's the trend now, right? I mean, this is the new reality. Maybe you touch on that a little bit.
So a lot of our services are built on preparedness. We want you to go into the boxing ring prepared, because when you take that first punch, you want to be able to stand. You don't want it to be a 2-second fight. And so you mentioned ransomware, you mentioned supply chains. We are thinking about controls. We've been talking today a lot about GRC, so a lot of controls across a lot of frameworks. Our services, test the efficacy of those controls. So, for example, the NIST cybersecurity framework, obviously it's not global or internationally, but it is known, worldwide. We do a lot of crosswalk into, other controls. What we've done is we've begun to couple our adversarial services to various aspects of the NIST CSF. So at Identify, we do a specific type of service. We might do a vulnerability test. We might do a light touch pen test. As you get to your detect and protect phases of the NIST CSF, we're doing more red team, more defensive collaboration. We want to know if the controls you've purchased, if the operators, the folks who are in charge of watching the hen house are actually, able to see things trigger. And then as we move further down from detect, protect to respond, that's the big thing. Can you respond? If you've detected it, can you actually respond efficiently? And so we work with both the offensive side of teams and the defensive side of teams to make sure that they know how we're attacking. We try to simulate how adversaries would attack an environment, and we help those teams both offensively and defensively tune their controls. We turn the knob to make sure that you're actually able and have the capability to withstand those attacks. And then at the recovery stage, we want to make sure that you're able to get the business back up and running quickly, that you're able to mitigate, that you have partners who could be called in, that you've got the right phone numbers on hand and the protocols in place to stand up the business again. But those are all tied to compliance and standards and frameworks to kind of validate those assurances that are on paper per compliance.
It kind of has to all come together, simultaneously, right? You've got a lot of things, balls in the air, a lot of frying pans cooking with
moving pieces, whole 9 yards.
Yeah. Jose and Mark, what are some growing concerns that you both are seeing with organizations that you support and work with, and you work with a lot of CISOs out there. What are some things that we should all be thinking about and should be prepared to do a little more, roll up the sleeves and do a little bit more work, because guess what? Yeah. It could be very real.
Yeah, I think the readiness piece that Mark was referring to is super important, right? But you can bring that down also, like, if you think about as you mentioned, right, the people working from home, right? Like, keep reminding them awareness, right? Like, awareness is one of the most important things you can do, right? Remind people in a nice way, hey, you're home, right? Like, I can have an MDM solution, right? I can be, monitoring traffic. I can have, systems, but if I'm grab my laptop, my work laptop, and give it to my kid to play games, things may get, ugly real quick. So people are like the weakest,
Yeah, the weakest link.
point. They always are, and minimize the risk, right? Just minimize the risk, right? Keep your, like, hey, the people are the weakest link, right? So make sure your access is restricted. Make sure that they don't have access to all your sensitive data, right? Make sure that you limit that access, right? Make sure that, right, like, those are the little things. And then just implement preventive controls, MFA, like I can't, hand and out things like MFA, like, and it's a bit of a balancing act, right, between having too many restrictions that people will circumvent them, right? Like if you start blocking all the USB ports and making your laptop unusable, guess what? People are going to find a way, right? They'll grab a laptop, grab this, right? So it's a bit of a balancing act. It's hard. I would say the being aware of there's always somebody out there that's trying to get you at a personal level also, right? Like there's fraud, but there is also and people need to be aware, hey, this data is my company's, I need to protect it. They need to feel empowered to protect it. I think that's important. They cannot just rely on the CISO to implement controls that nothing's going to happen, right? Like they need to feel empowered, and they need to feel like they are part of the solution as well, and they are responsible for the overall security of the organization. And so,
yeah, what is the obligation for a CISO, in any organization? What when you lay it out there for them, what at the end of the day, what is it?
Yeah, I don't know, being worried about a lot of things all the time. Yeah. There's my view of the role is to minimize risk for the business, right? Like I don't think we're not here to police people. We're not here to tell you what not to do, right?
Yeah.
You want to go down this path and you make a business decision to do something. I'm going to tell you what the risks are, and I'm going to tell you how to minimize them, right? And that's our job. So in many cases, people see them as blockers, right? But that's not what it is, right? It's more of a
you're like the C-3PO of Star Wars, right? Never tell me the odds. I had to throw that out there. Yeah, well, listen, you're right. I mean, you can give a detailed explanation of what the possible issues and risks are. It's really incumbent upon everybody to sort of make mature decisions and follow. If it's compliance related, you kind of have you really need to adhere to the rules there, and they are certainly. The trend is more compliance. It's not going the other direction. I think it's a false economy not to apportion a good amount of your time and operational budget not to look at these things. I think, especially, if you're a language agency now, I think it's a key differentiator, to say, hey, listen, we take your data very seriously. We take your privacy very seriously. And this is what we have done to instill that confidence in you. And maybe we're not a tech company, but we're primarily a service company, but we are on top of this, right? That's going to become increasingly more important. We're winding down the hour. I can't believe it. It's getting close to, and maybe we'll put up that other poll question now. Looking forward into 2022, what are there any pieces of legislation or new privacy? I mean, I've seen a lot of countries just trot out new privacy acts as well. New Zealand just released a new Privacy Act in 2020. Australia updated things, I think 2018. And these things are sort of, living documents that are every year HIPAA changes a little bit. What are some things that folks should be looking out for in 2022?
I think you're right. Like privacy is the one that's top of mind right now, especially from a consumer point of view, right? They're trying to protect that, but also B2B, right? The other one, and you can see it, right, is the supply chain, right? Like you can see Biden's presidential order, right? Like you can see CMMC, right? Like starting to take place, right? There's going to be a lot more emphasis on supply chain and protection, right, of the fourth parties, right? I know, Congress in the US starting to think about, like, having legislation to make cybersecurity insurance companies, right, ask for some type of proof before you get that, insurance. You need to demonstrate that you're actually protecting your data, right? We'll see how it plays out, but I can see, this privacy and supply chain. So your vendors, right? Like those are the two things that I see coming up this year. So like you said, more and more compliance. But I look at it as trust, right? Like, just how do you build that trust in the market?
And additionally, I would add a third piece to that and make it a trident. So ransomware dealers. It's also part of that presidential order. We're seeing increased activity among nation states and those who are operating within nation states unchecked, and the opportunistic attacks that we're seeing out there should give some pause for folks who are responsible for securing data, for securing information of customers and clients, and especially in the services that folks on this call are involved in. And so some preparedness around that. In the risk assessment space, we're seeing a pivot to risk quantification. So it used to be a lot of risk matrices, a number that was based on kind of vague data. Folks want to know, if I get ransomware, how much is it going to cost me? So getting down to exact numbers, how much of the business is going to be impacted if such event were to happen, and can I put specific dollars on that event? And so there's a lot of adoption for fair risk assessments and the like to kind of quantify the cost of a breach more accurately.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's kind of like how long is a piece of string question sometimes, right? How do you answer that? Speaking of which, we need to probably jump to some questions. I want to make sure that we get a few questions from our audience here, and I can't believe we're almost up to the top of the hour. I got through maybe half my questions, but I want to make sure I solicit questions from the folks out there. So, GALA, do we have some questions for Mark and for Jose?
Peter, there are a couple of questions.
Great.
I don't know if GALA can bring them up onto the screen. Some of them have been partially answered in your presentation. I think the first one is, what is the most worrying cybersecurity issue today that you think we should be paying more attention to?
Okay.
Mark, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm going to again sound the alarm. Ransomware for this group. I kind of have a sensibility for the folks on the call. I have a background in philology and linguistics of Near Eastern languages, so I think about translation all the time. I'm doing translation. My wife teaches English as a second language, and so she's in a school district that thinks about this thing all the time. About first protecting the privacy of those consuming the platforms that are being used for instruction, and secondly, making sure that the right controls are in place, working with her technology partners to make sure that those platforms are secure. One of those things that are challenging school districts and other places is ransomware. I'm not sure how much of this industry is involved in supply chain attacks. Maybe in some of your software development, some of your teams used for Q&A. We did see the Code Cove issue a few months back that attacked even security companies. Right? This it's a tool that was available to everyone to help you build software, and that software was back-ended by attackers. And so, I think, as Jose noted, supply chains, ransomware, and especially ransomware targeting school districts.
Sure. Quite scary.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Another question, how do you go about verifying or at least gaining confidence in the security posture of third-party vendors of our direct vendors. So there is a long chain, it's not just the one company. Behind the company is a whole chain of people.
That's right. Like it's got fourth parties, fifth parties, right? Like it just goes on. I would, the most important thing is like not every vendor is the same. Not everybody is, dealing with the same data sensitivity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Understanding what have you outsourced and how important that is for your organization is the first step, right? Just thinking about what happens if they go down, right? What happens if they disappear? Like what happens if they have an issue, right? What happens if they lose the data, right? And then that's going to help you assess what level of questions you need to ask them, and how much you gotta dig into their security and their privacy practices, right? And just again, right? I'm all about minimizing risk, right, from both ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can, maybe not send them such sensitive information, and the other way around, right? If you're in the language industry, right, can you mask the data you're dealing with to maybe mask what's super sensitive, right? Like if you're dealing with like a health industry, right? Like just mask patient data, and guess what? If you mask it well enough, you may not have to comply with HIPAA because you don't have it, you don't see it, right? So that can save you a lot of money, right? Minimize that risk, because that really is a money saving strategy, right? And it's the same with third parties, right? Like that goes both ways.
Minimizing risks equals saving money. That's a takeaway for sure. We have time for one more quick question before we have to wrap it up. And so I don't know, Sharon, is there another?
There's one more. How worried should I be about cyber threats and data privacy breaches due to our employees and vendors who are now working under COVID from home offices, and how can we reduce that risk?
Right. We covered that a little bit earlier, but yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be an ongoing question as we continue to work from home, right? Any quick fixes for that one?
Yeah, I think we did cover a little bit, right? But I mean, keep reminding them that they are at risk because of it, right? Again, right, the zero trust model, like MFA, making sure that whoever is accessing your systems is authenticated and it's the real person who should be accessing, right? Like it can, like people will get used to it. It seems annoying at the beginning, right? Having to, grab your phone and get a message or having an authenticator app, right? But it's one of the best things, like multi-factor authentication.
Yeah,
everybody
I was gonna say here in the stateside, I mean, we have DHS that are providing resources locally in local jurisdictions throughout North America. They also work with member states and around the world to kind of help with this COVID or just pandemics in general. We have some resources that we share with our partners and with our clients that are helping folks to prepare for these specific situations. And so those interagency resources are out there, and folks should seek those local agencies for that additional help as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Mark, Jose, thank you so much for joining us here at GALA Connect to talk to us about cybersecurity, something that we could probably go several hours and deep do a deep dive on any one of these compliance programs, because each bears its own challenges and unique attributes. Definitely recommend anybody that's contemplating. We'll look at the poll a little bit later. I need to see what those answers were, but it seems to me that a lot of folks are sort of in between. Like they have attempted it or started it, but a lot of folks have are also just sort of getting started now, and it is a journey, definitely. I want to thank both of you for joining me today, and that's the bell, and I think we're gonna have to
thank you very much.
But thanks so much.
Thank you,
everybody, for joining us. And please, if there's any further questions, Dieter will be around, probably in the booths or the lounge. Or thank you so much, and we'll see you probably backstage.
Thank you.